At a crowded Italian restaurant on a Saturday afternoon, my fiancé leaned forward, smiled for the room, and said loud enough for strangers to hear, "The engagement is over. I don't love you anymore. My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 28 years old." And that sentence was supposed to destroy me. The place smelled like garlic and burnt espresso. Forks paused mid-air. Chairs stopped scraping. Conversations died the way candles do when someone snaps their fingers. Evan's voice carried clean and confident, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. Maybe he had. The table near the window caught the best light. He'd requested it. Of course he did. If you've ever felt a room turn against you all at once, you know the feeling. The heat in your face, the thud in your chest, the invisible hands waiting to shove you down. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, share your story in the comments. 3 tables away, Evan's friend sat just close enough to hear every word. Ross pretended to check his phone. Camden watched me like this was a show he'd paid for. Jonah leaned back, already smiling. Too close to be coincidence. Too spaced out to look involved. It was staged. I just didn't know how deep yet. I held my fork above my plate of pasta. The noodles glistened under warm yellow lights. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. I waited for the crack. The collapse. The sound I was supposed to make. Nothing came. Evan watched me with that look I'd seen 100 times before, expectant, satisfied. Like a kid tugging wings off something small to see if it would still try to fly. "Did you hear me?" he asked, softer now but sharp. "I did," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Calm, clean. He blinked. Just once. I reached for my left hand and slid the ring off. No rush. No drama. The diamond caught the light the way it always did, begging for attention. I dropped it into my coat pocket and met his eyes. "Thank you for being honest," I said. A laugh broke from Ross's table. Evan's mouth twitched upward. This was supposed to be the opening act. Tears first, panic second. Bargaining after dessert. I took a breath, sipped my water. The glass clinked softly when I set it down. "You know what I said," tilting my head. "I think this calls for an escape party." The laughter died fast. Forks clattered. Someone coughed. Evan's smile froze thin and confused. That was the moment something clicked inside me. Not a break. A lock finding its key. I stood, placed cash on the table for my share, and felt every eye track my movement as I walked out. I didn't know it yet, but Evan had rehearsed this scene for weeks. What he hadn't rehearsed was me refusing my role. I didn't rush. That mattered. Evan expected urgency. He expected me to scramble to grab my coat with shaking hands to knock a chair over on the way out. He expected spectacle. That's what he'd set the room for. Instead, I moved with the kind of calm that makes people uncomfortable, the kind that suggests you know something they don't. "Clara," he said as I slid my chair back. His tone sharpened. "Sit down. We should talk like adults." I looked at him, really looked at him. The crisp shirt, the careful haircut, the posture that said control even when he felt it slipping. "We already did," I said. "You made an announcement." Camden snorted from his table. Jonah shifted, suddenly interested in the salt shaker. Ross didn't look up from his phone. I noticed the angle of it then. Too steady. Too deliberate. Evan leaned back, jaw tight. "You're in shock. This isn't how you usually act." There it was. The first correction. The quiet rewrite. I picked up my bag. "Maybe you never noticed how I actually act." He laughed short and sharp. "Don't do this. Don't pretend you're okay." I paused just long enough to let the words hang. "I'm not pretending." The server hovered nearby, eyes wide, trapped between us and the rest of the room. I slid the cash closer to her and gave a small nod. She mouthed, "Thank you." I could tell she'd be telling this story later. I hoped she remembered who stayed calm. As I turned toward the exit, Evan's voice followed me. Louder now. For the room. "You're really gonna walk out like this?" I stopped. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. "I walked in like this," I said. "You just didn't see it." Outside, the air hit my face hard. Cold, wet. Portland in early spring always smells like rain and concrete. My hands still weren't shaking. That scared me more than panic would have. I crossed the parking lot slowly. Each step felt deliberate, like I was teaching my body a new language. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel and stared straight ahead. The dashboard hummed softly. Somewhere, a car alarm chirped and died. My phone buzzed. Evan. That was unnecessary. Call me. I didn't respond. Another buzz. Evan. You embarrassed me. I laughed. Just once. Bitter. Quiet. For 4 years, I'd learned to monitor myself. Tone, timing, volume. If Evan was upset, it was my fault for pushing. If he was pleased, it was because I'd listened. I'd been trained to anticipate him, to soften first, to apologize early. Sitting there, keys cold in my hand, I realized something terrifying and freeing. He didn't know what to do when I didn't react. My phone buzzed again. Evan, you're making this worse. I turned the phone face down and started the engine. The radio came on mid-sentence, some upbeat ad about weekend getaways. I pulled out of the lot and caught a glimpse of the restaurant window in my mirror. Evan was still at the table. Ross had leaned in close, whispering. Camden gestured, animated. Jonah watched me drive away. They were recalibrating, adjusting the story. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment Evan realized he'd lost control of the narrative. He just didn't understand how badly. I drove home with the strange certainty that whatever he had planned next depended on me breaking, and I wasn't going to give him that. I didn't go straight inside when I got home. I sat in my car in the apartment parking lot, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the peeling white lines on the asphalt. They were faded, barely visible anymore. I remember thinking how fitting that felt. My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 28 years old, and for 4 years I'd been slowly disappearing without realizing it. I met Evan when I was 24, fresh out of college, first real job. Event operations assistant at a downtown conference center. I was tired all the time, broke most of the time, and wildly optimistic in a way that embarrasses me now. Evan walked into my life like an answer. Tall, polished, confident in that smooth, reassuring way that makes you feel chosen. On our first date, he listened. Or at least I thought he did. He nodded at the right moments. Asked questions that made me feel interesting. When I talked about wanting to run my own events one day, he smiled like a proud mentor. That's ambitious, he said. I like that. I didn't notice how often he repeated my words back to me, later reshaped, like he'd cataloged them, filed them away. The first year felt easy. Too easy. Evan liked nice restaurants. He liked planning things. He liked being seen as the guy with his life together. I mistook that for stability, for safety. Then the adjustments started. Small ones. Your friends are kind of negative, he said once, casual, while scrolling through his phone. They don't really get where we're going. So I saw them less. My place is way closer to my office, he said. It just makes sense. So I moved. That business idea is risky, he said. You've got a solid path already. Why mess it up? So I waited. Every change came wrapped in logic, in concern, in what sounded like partnership. And every time I hesitated, he'd tilt his head and say, I just want what's best for us. For us. That phrase followed everything. By the second year, I started checking in before making plans. Not because he demanded it. Because it felt easier than explaining. I told myself that was compromise, that this was what grown-up relationships looked like. You smooth the edges. You adjust. Marlo noticed before I did. We met for coffee one afternoon, squeezed into a corner booth at a diner with flickering neon lights. She watched me talk, nodding too much, apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. Do you ever feel smaller? She asked suddenly. I laughed it off. What do you mean? She stirred her coffee eyes steady on mine, like you're taking up less space than you used to. I smiled, changed the subject. I wasn't ready to hear it. And she knew that. Evan proposed a year and a half in, at his parents' anniversary party. 200 people. Champagne. Phones raised in the air like it was a concert. He dropped to one knee right when the music swelled. I said yes because there was no space to say anything else. Later that night, when we were alone, he kissed my forehead and said everyone loved that. Not I loved that. Everyone. Wedding planning made everything clearer in hindsight. I wanted simple, intimate. He wanted grand, strategic. A guest list packed with colleagues and connections. When I pushed back, he'd sigh. This isn't just about you, Clara, he'd say. These people matter. To him. Whenever I disagreed, he had a way of making me feel emotional, irrational, like I was complicating things that didn't need complication. I learned to swallow words before they reached my mouth, learned that silence kept the peace. Publicly, he praised me. She's so organized. She keeps me grounded. Privately, he corrected me. My tone, my timing, the way I told stories. You talk too fast when you're nervous, he'd say lightly. It makes you sound unsure. There were moments that should have stopped me, like the dinner party where he corrected my pronunciation in front of everyone smiling like it was a joke, or the way he'd pay for everything and then remind me casually what things cost. Don't worry about it, he'd say. I've got it. What he meant was, I decide. By the time my mother pulled me aside at Christmas and asked, "Does he make you happy?" I had an answer ready. Of course, I said. We're building something. I didn't know when I'd stopped asking myself if I was happy. Sitting in my car that afternoon, the restaurant scene replayed in my head. Evan's confidence, his certainty, the way he'd expected me to break. And suddenly all those small moments lined up into something ugly and clear. I hadn't just been in a relationship. I'd been managed. I went inside, kicked off my shoes, and dropped my bag by the door. The apartment was quiet in that hollow way that amplifies your thoughts. My phone buzzed again on the counter. Evan's name lit up the screen. I didn't pick it up. For the first time in 4 years, I let myself sit with the truth. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to control how I felt. I didn't open my laptop right away. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the refrigerator humming behind me, the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. My phone lay face down on the counter like it might bite if I touched it. Evan hadn't stopped texting. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. Confusion, accusation, reframing. Finally, I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. We shared a cloud account. That had been Evan's idea. Transparency, he'd called it. No secrets. I'd thought it was a sign of trust. I see now it was arrogance. He never imagined I'd look. The familiar folders loaded slowly. Wedding, finances, travel, work. I clicked through them without a plan, more out of instinct than logic. My chest felt tight, like I was walking through a house I didn't recognize anymore. Then I saw it. A folder I didn't remember creating. The title was clinical, efficient, almost boring, priority messaging, post announcement. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I could hear my own heartbeat, dull and loud in my ears. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, that this was probably nothing, that I was already raw and looking for meaning where there was none. I clicked it anyway. Inside was a single document. The timestamp hit me first, created 12 days before the lunch. 12 days before Evan looked me in the eye and ended our engagement in front of strangers like it was a performance piece. I scrolled. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement to Clara. This wasn't easy, but I realized I couldn't commit to a future that didn't align with my values and long-term goals. My stomach dropped. I read it again. Slower this time. Every word was polished, measured, designed to sound reasonable, noble even. There was no anger in it, no cruelty, just enough distance to make him look thoughtful, just enough vagueness to make me sound like the problem. I sat back in my chair, breath shallow. He hadn't reacted to the breakup. He'd announced it. There were notes beneath the draft. Bullet points, names, Ross, Camden, Jonah, a few colleagues, a couple of distant relatives, people to notify immediately, people whose opinions mattered. This wasn't damage control. This was rollout. My hands started shaking then. Not from sadness, from recognition. The kind that feels like cold water down your spine. I clicked through the document history. Edits, revisions, a sentence added here, a word softened there. He'd worked on this, thought about it, perfected it. While I was planning centerpieces and seating charts, he was planning my public erasure. I closed the document and stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Every moment from the restaurant replayed itself with new meaning. The table by the window, the volume of his voice, the way his friends had been positioned just right. This wasn't impulse. This was choreography. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. Evan, people are asking questions. We need to get on the same page. On the same page. I let out a short, humorless laugh. He thought I was behind, confused, scrambling to catch up. I opened the cloud again and dug deeper. That's when I realized this wasn't just about leaving me. It was about controlling what came after. about shaping the story before I could even open my mouth. He didn't want a breakup. He wanted a narrative where he looked brave and I looked unstable, where his exit was justified and my pain was evidence. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms flat against the desk, grounding myself. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I did something else entirely. I started paying attention. Because if Evan had written the ending before it happened, then everything I thought I knew about that day was wrong. And whatever he was hiding next, it was already in motion. I slept maybe 3 hours that night. Not because I was crying, because my brain wouldn't shut up. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Every moment starts rearranging itself like a crime scene when you finally know where to look. I kept thinking about Ross's phone, the angle, the way he hadn't even pretended to hide it. By morning, my silence had turned deliberate. I didn't answer Evan's texts. I didn't post anything. I didn't call my mom. I made coffee, burned the toast, and sat on the couch listening to the neighbor's shower run through the thin apartment wall. Ordinary sounds, grounding sounds. Around noon, my phone rang. "Marlo, I didn't want to tell you this over text," she said the second I picked up. Her voice was tight in that way I recognized. Controlled anger. "But I need you to hear it from me." I didn't say anything. I already knew it wasn't good. "One of my coworkers is dating someone who knows Ross," she continued. "They were talking about Saturday." My fingers curled into the couch cushion, and I said, "And Ross didn't just happen to be there," she said. "None of them did." The room felt smaller. "They knew," Marlo said. "Before you even walked into that restaurant, they knew he was ending it. They were told to be there, to witness." "Witness." I swallowed. "Witness what?" There was a pause, a breath. "Your reaction." Something cold slid through my chest. Marlo kept talking faster now. "Evan's been telling people for months that you're emotionally unstable, that you're clingy, that you overreact, that he was scared to break things off privately because you might lose it." I closed my eyes. "He needed proof," she said. "He needed people to see it happen so he could say, 'See, this is what I was dealing with.'" The restaurant snapped back into focus. The volume of his voice, the way he'd repeated himself, the way he'd looked at me, waiting. Ross wasn't filming a memory. He was filming evidence. "I saw it," I said quietly. "The phone. I just didn't understand why." "That's why," Marlo said. "You were supposed to break down. Cry, beg, raise your voice. Anything he could point to later, but I didn't," I said. "No," she said. "You didn't." And that's the problem. It hit me then. Not like a wave, like a weight settling exactly where it belonged. This wasn't about ending our relationship. It was about justifying it. Every text Evan had sent since Saturday suddenly made sense. "You're in shock. This isn't like you. People are worried about you." He wasn't concerned. He was confused. His entire plan depended on me playing the part he'd assigned, and I'd ruined the shot. "He's scrambling," Marlo said, "trying to explain why you didn't react the way he said you would. He's telling people you're still processing, that the meltdown is coming." I let out a slow breath. "He needs me to fall apart." "Yes," she said, "because if you don't, everything he's told them starts to look like a lie." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. The apartment felt different now, like I'd been living in a set without realizing it and someone had just turned on the house lights. I thought about all the times Evan had told me what other people supposedly thought of me. "My coworkers say you're intense. My friends think you're too sensitive. My mom thinks you take things personally." I'd believed him, adjusted, apologized, shrunk. He hadn't just been managing me. He'd been managing everyone else's perception of me too. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Evan. "I'm worried about you. This silence isn't healthy." I stared at the screen and felt something solid settle in my chest. For the first time, I understood the real danger. If I reacted emotionally now, even privately, he'd use it, twist it, leak it, frame it. If I stayed silent without purpose, he'd narrate the silence for me. I needed to choose my next move carefully, because Evan Crossley didn't just want to leave me, he wanted proof that leaving me made sense. And I wasn't done denying him that. I didn't find Lydia by snooping through his phone. That would have been too easy, too obvious. Evan wasn't careless like that. He didn't leave messes where they could be traced back to him. He outsourced his messes, labeled them, justified them. I found Lydia in a spreadsheet. It was buried in a folder called Q 3 personal development. Evan loved names like that. They sounded productive, responsible, safe. Inside were expenses, conferences, flights, hotel rooms, and one recurring line item that didn't belong. L. Hale Brand Strategy Consultation. I stared at it longer than I should have. Consultation. Not dinner, not drinks, not anything romantic. Just clean professional language, the kind that made everything else look paranoid by comparison. I Googled her. Lydia Hale, image consultant, crisis branding, reputation management. Her website was all cool neutrals and carefully lit headshots, smiling CEOs, polished politicians, testimonials about navigating transitions with integrity. I felt my pulse in my throat. This wasn't a woman he'd fallen for by accident. This was someone he'd hired. I clicked back into the cloud and searched her name. More files appeared, emails, calendars, notes. My hands were steady now. That scared me too. They'd met at a pharmaceutical marketing summit in San Diego, 5 months earlier. Right around the time Evan started pulling away at night. Right around the time he'd started talking about next chapters and alignment, the emails were clipped. Strategic. Nothing explicit. That was the point. Once this is done, we can go public. I need it clean. I read that line 3 times. Clean. He wasn't ending an engagement. He was transitioning brands. I thought back to the restaurant, the witnesses, the recording, the pre-written announcement. Suddenly, Lydia slid into place like the missing piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to finish. Evan wasn't just leaving me for someone else. He was replacing me. Replacing the image, the story, the narrative. Lydia wasn't a threat to me emotionally. She was a collaborator. Someone helping him exit one life and debut another without stains. Someone teaching him how to look like the good guy while quietly burning everything behind him. My phone rang again. Evan's name. I let it ring out. Then a text. We need to talk before this gets out of hand. Out of hand. As if I was the variable he couldn't control anymore. I sat back on the couch and stared at the ceiling, the faint sound of traffic humming through the walls. 4 years. 4 years of believing I was building something real with someone who was always planning his next upgrade. I thought of every time he'd told me I was too emotional, too attached, too invested. And I saw it clearly now. He'd needed me to be that way, because the story only worked if I looked like the problem. I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Nothing at All. Just a blank page. No dramatic names, no declarations. I wasn't going to confront Lydia. I wasn't going to expose Evan online. I wasn't going to warn anyone. That was what he expected. What he couldn't anticipate was restraint. People like Evan don't fear anger. They fear clarity. They fear silence that isn't empty but waiting. I closed the laptop and stood walking to the window. The city lights blinked on as dusk settled in. Somewhere out there, Evan was scrambling, calling, adjusting his talking points. He thought the danger was exposure. He didn't realize the real danger was contrast. Because the more composed I remained, the more his story unraveled on its own. And I had just decided what I was going to do next. I didn't call it a revenge party. That would have been loud, predictable. Too easy for Evan to point at and say, "See, this is what I warned you about." Instead, I called it a new beginning. That was the name I gave the venue coordinator when I called her on Monday morning. My voice didn't shake. I remember that because I noticed everything about my voice that week like it belonged to someone else. "Yes," I told her. "I'd like to repurpose the deposit." There was a pause on the line, papers shuffling, then a soft laugh. "Honey," she said, "you're not the first bride to do that, and you won't be the last." The ballroom I'd once imagined filled with white linens and soft music began to change in my head. The flowers I actually loved. The colors Evan had vetoed because they were too loud. The lighting warm instead of sterile. A room that felt like me again. I didn't announce anything online. I sent invitations quietly. Texts, emails, a few phone calls. The wording was simple. "Please join me to celebrate a new chapter." No explanations, no names. That drove Evan crazy. I knew because his messages shifted from confused to panicked. "People are talking. What exactly are you telling them? I think you're making a mistake." I didn't respond. The night of the party arrived faster than I expected. October air, cool and sharp, the kind that makes everything feel awake. I stood in the bathroom of my apartment adjusting a dress Evan had once said was a little much. I smiled at my reflection. Good. The venue glowed when I walked in. Soft amber lights, low music, the sound of laughter already building. My chest tightened not with fear but with something close to grief for the woman who almost never made it here. Marlo was the first to hug me. "Look at you," she said. "You're here." People kept arriving. Friends I hadn't seen in years, coworkers, family, faces from different versions of my life that Evan had slowly walled off. They filled the room with warmth and noise and stories that didn't revolve around him. And then there were the others, people from Evan's world, colleagues, friends of friends, the ones on his list. I recognized them immediately. The way they scanned the room, the way they watched me when they thought I wasn't looking. They expected chaos. They found calm. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. Conversations carried the truth quietly like electricity under the floor. When people asked what happened, I answered simply, factually. Sometimes I showed them the documents. Sometimes I didn't have to. The contrast did the work for me. Around 9:30, the room shifted. I felt it before I saw him. A tightening, a hush that rippled outward. Evan stood at the entrance of the ballroom, jaw-clenched eyes scanning like he was counting exits. He looked angry, uninvited, exposed. He walked straight toward me. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed when he was close enough. His voice was low-sharp, designed not to carry. I met his gaze. "Hosting a party." "You're lying to people," he said. "You're showing them fabricated evidence." "I'm showing them our files," I said. "The ones you created." His face flushed. "You went through my things." "Our things I corrected." "You called it transparency." He laughed loud and brittle. "This is exactly what I was talking about, this behavior. You're unstable." The word hung between us. I felt eyes turn, phones lift. I didn't raise my voice. "Evan," I said, "you planned a public breakup. You invited witnesses. You had messages drafted before it happened. You were seeing Lydia while we were still engaged. All of that is documented." "You're twisting it," he snapped. "You're doing this to punish me." I tilted my head. "I didn't invite you." That did it. His composure cracked. Not dramatically. Worse. Slowly. He started talking faster, louder, repeating himself. The room listened. "See," he said, gesturing at me. "This is what I dealt with." No one nodded. No one stepped in. What they saw didn't match what he'd told them. He stopped, looked around, really looked. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Then he turned and walked out. No applause, no confrontation, just the quiet collapse of a story he could no longer control. The music came back on. Conversations resumed softer, now thoughtful. People looked at me differently, not with pity, with understanding. I stood there breathing in the moment, knowing this wasn't the end. But it was the turning point. The party didn't end when Evan left. That was the strange part. For a few seconds, it felt like the whole room was holding its breath, like someone had just shut a door too hard, and everyone was waiting for the echo. Then the band started playing again. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed a little, unsure at first, then louder. Life rushed back in. Evan had expected everything to collapse without him. Instead, the room exhaled. People drifted toward me slowly, not in a rush. Not like they were coming to congratulate a winner or comfort a victim. More like they were recalibrating what they thought they knew. One woman I barely recognized touched my arm gently. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I believed things I shouldn't have." I nodded. "I understand." And I meant it. Because I finally understood something too. Evan hadn't just manipulated me. He'd manipulated the space around me, the opinions, the silence, the doubt. He'd counted on people never comparing notes. That night, they did. I didn't stay late. I didn't need to. Around midnight, when the music softened and the crowd thinned, I slipped out with Marlo. The air outside was cold and clean. I took a deep breath and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Peace. The weeks that followed were quieter. Evan didn't contact me again. I heard things through other people. That Lydia had stepped back. That his coworkers were suddenly distant. That his version of events didn't land the way it used to. I didn't follow the details. I didn't need to. I focused on what was in front of me. The event planning business I'd always postponed. The clients who came through word of mouth. The feeling of making decisions without asking permission. A year later, I stood in my own office. Bare walls, second-hand desk, a stack of invoices waiting to be paid. The rain tapped gently against the window, the same Portland rhythm I'd always loved. I thought about that restaurant. The way Evan had leaned forward, confident the moment belonged to him. The way he'd needed witnesses to validate his exit. He thought he was handing me humiliation. What he handed me was clarity. They tried to make me disappear quietly, to shrink me into a cautionary tale they could control. Instead, they gave me the one thing I'd been missing the entire time: my voice. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, your own relationship, your own life, leave a comment and share your experience. You're not alone. And this story, it isn't over yet.